if you're going to remove the steering wheel, the airbag needs to come out first. Make sure to start off with that the steering wheel is perfectly centered, wheel straight ahead. And then you're going to get a screwdriver like this to remove the airbag. There's a hole here at the back and you're going to push it up like that, and you should be able to see those clips moving up when we do that, and they are going to release those 4 lugs there. Sometimes it helps because these airbags are pretty tight in there and they just don't want to pop straight out. You can just put a little bit of pressure on it from the inside and that will ease up the tension on those clips in there, and that thing should just pop straight out. Once that's out, there are the connections on the inside. There are 3 on the bit that's connected to the airbag. I think that one there is for the horn. Those are the 2 for the airbag, which go onto the back of it. They will be punched in, so just get a screwdriver, lift those up, and then just wiggle those out. Disconnect that one. Then at the back there, you've got this one here. You'll need to press that down. I think there might also be another one if you've got the heated steering. I'm not exactly sure. So, but press that down, pull that off because that's connected to the steering wheel switch behind. Once the airbag comes out, you've got a big bolt there that goes into the steering column. That's an M12 triple square. So that needs to come out. Then the steering wheel can be pulled straight off. And like I said before, there's a mark there at the 12 o'clock, which needs to marry up with the mark at the 12 o'clock on the steering column, which is very fine, really difficult to see. And I would advocate getting a knife immediately and marking that so you don't get that mixed up afterwards. And then that can just get pulled straight off. When you're installing the airbag, be really, really careful not to get this cord jammed up down the side of the airbag. So we've got our connections. We're going to put both of those on. So they have been pushed in and those plungers have been put in there. Put that for the horn there. That cord there is going to go behind that little clip there. And then with it at the 12 o'clock, what you want to do is put it in and just take it nice and easy and wiggle as you go. And if it starts to bind, then stop, pull it out and work out what's going on. But generally just put it in like that. And then I'm actually just going to sit there and sort of bounce it on the springs and feel that yep, it's definitely in place. And then I'm going to click it into place. And now you can see that's fine with the horn, etc., and nothing's bound. But I've had this before where I haven't done it correctly and I've pushed it in there and it's jammed inside, and getting this thing out afterwards is a nightmare. You actually have to pull all the shrouding off in here to get access to this, where you can then get a screwdriver from behind as you push up on here to push the airbag out, and eventually the thing will come out. But yeah, you don't want that. And like I said before, we're going to push up on that clip to release that and the airbag. If it doesn't want to pop out, because it's sometimes a bit hard, then pushing it from the front just a little bit allows it just to pop straight out. One of the problems I had on my car as well as on this one was when the airbag goes in, it's such a tight fit and the horn can get jammed on. And I've seen some posts elsewhere in different places about how that's a problem. And there was a service bulletin that came out which put different springs in the back here to make those a bit firmer, etc. And also put some grease on this. But I mean, I did a bunch of stuff to try and fix these problems, and I think I finally sussed out where the issue was. Firstly, there's these bumps around here, which go on the inside, but also there are actually these things that press out around the inside of the steering wheel, which press onto the bits here that have some tape on them. You can see where it actually marks. I've put a bit of carbon graphite on those to try and fix those. I've also ground back these just with a Dremel tool and a small sanding wheel just to give it a bit more clearance. That still didn't seem to fix the problem, and what I eventually ended up doing, which solved it perfectly on both was on the airbag itself. There are these slots. There are 4 of them at the back that slot into these lugs back here, and that's actually where it was binding. So I got my Dremel tool in there and just lightly sanded each of those, and now it is just perfect as I would expect it to. It moves in and out really easy. It's never going to jammed on. It doesn't rattle or anything, but it's kind of perfect and as I would expect it to be. To remove the steering column switch here, obviously you need to remove the airbag, then the steering wheel and the trim on the top and the bottom of it. Have a look at the interior trim video that I did for how to remove those. And then once this is off, and it's close to impossible to film this, but I'll just show you after I pulled it out. It's basically held just by a single screw there that clamps down around that there, and then that just slides straight off. But before then, there are 2 electrical connections. There's that one there, which slots into that spot there. So that's actually going to be, you'll have to get your head in underneath here to do that. And it has a single button on the side there that you press in, that just pops out nicely. And this one here actually goes in at the front under there. You'll actually need to get a screwdriver in there and really push it in a fair way, and once you do that enough, it actually just pops straight out, which is nice. There's a whole bunch of other connection stuff here. You don't have to touch any of those, it's just those 2. In addition, you've got these things here that just presses into the back, into there, and that one there is just gripping onto one of those. I can't remember which one it is, but it's pretty obvious when you get around there that you just need to pry that one out. That just pulls straight out, and this one you just lever that off, and then once that's released, the thing just pops straight off. To remove the steering column, obviously the airbag steering wheel, the switch around the outside here needs to come off. I've got the dashboard off at the moment just so it's a bit easier to see what's going on, but you don't need the dashboard off, but the trim underneath here needs to come off. First thing I'm going to do is just remove this lower foot vent pipe. There's a single Torx screw there. Once that's removed, you can just pull that out. It just pops straight off. And then from there, the screws that need to be removed, there are 4 from underneath here. Don't touch any of these. It's just that one, and the same on the other side. And I'll show you a picture in a moment of where the ones at the back here, there's a big pivot at the back here with a big long screw with a nut on the other side. So you need to hold on to one side and unscrew this side here. And then the whole thing just lowers down. In the workshop manual, it talks about removal of the steering column and leaving this connection here at the universal joint in place and pulling it out the back here, and slip that up, and hopefully you can see there's a keyed connection that this shaft here slides straight out of. That's got a lot of splines and it seems to be reasonably deep. It talks about just being able to pull that out. I could not do that. I put a mallet on it, and I didn't want to do a whole bunch of damage because there's obviously universal joints and the steering gear, etc. on the other side, but that just did not want to budge, so I actually had to remove it from here. And the problem with that is that this thing here is actually reasonably tight, this connection. The end of the steering column goes in there, and you can see that that's got splines on it. It's quite a tight fit, even with the bolt that goes in here removed. And so what I end up coming up with, which seemed to work reasonably well, is I needed a little wedge of some sort to jam up in here to open up this a little bit, because once we lower it from here, I need to be able to pull it out, and if it's jammed in there, it's just a complete pain. So what I've done is I've got a 10mm bolt, and I've just used an angle grinder to turn that into a bit of a wedge. The gap in here is a little under 4mm, so I've made that, started about 3.5, and then I've used a clamp to jam that up inside. That is after I've removed that screw, and then once I lowered the steering rack down, the steering column down, it allowed that thing to come out. It was still a bit tight, but it enabled me to pull it out reasonably simply. Be careful, don't just get a screwing driver or something like that and whack it up in here to try and jam it, because if it comes up high enough and hits the splines on the steering column shaft that's going into it, it will damage those, and you don't want that to happen. So you need something that's only going to go up a little bit, like I've done there. And when you're installing, I would suggest when you remove, leave this in place after you've removed the steering column out, put it back in on installation and remove it as the last thing, because what you want to do is put this up in place, bolt everything together, and then have this in nicely the right spot, pull that out, and it's going to be easy to remove with some pliers, and then you can put the screw in here. So here is the steering column when it's removed. The connection points, there are those 4 nuts that come off from the bottom here. There's a big long bolt that goes along at the back there, which looks like that, and it goes into that bracket there. So you'll need to screw on one side, counter hold with the other. With that pipe removed here, there's actually plenty of room, and you probably don't need to remove that that trim that sits underneath here. You can probably just lie on your back with the seat out and get underneath here and just remove all this stuff. The points that actually join onto these screws, they're actually very tight. And it grabs on the actual steering column. So that's what it actually looks like. It's actually an E7 Torx that actually screws up in there, and this sort of just would not come out, so I actually ended up having to remove one of those to pop it out. So that's actually screwed in, where is it? There, like that. And then the steering column goes on, and then that nut goes over the top. So if you're struggling with that, it's pretty easy just to remove 1 or 2 of those. So the electronic steering lock, single Torx screw, what I've also done is I've just marked where its orientation is. I'm not sure if that's going to make any difference at all, just so it goes back in the same spot. But once that Torx screw is removed, basically that just pulls up. It sort of fits under a lug at the front here. I'm not sure if you can see them there, but there we go. It just little lug that comes in and out there. That seems to be just sort of spring loaded down. That goes in there and locks the steering. There's a bunch of things you can do to replace, etc., when the steering column's in place, or you don't actually have to completely remove it. You could remove the nuts from those screws that go down here, as well as the big one along the back there, and lower it down so it's still connected at the back. And you could remove the steering lock, which is that one there. You would just remove that single screw, rotate that out, and then just put a new one in there. And I think that would need to be coded via PWIS from what I'm seeing in the workshop manual. On the underside, so at the back looking, so from underneath, this is where the 2 motors would sit if you have the electronic adjustment of this. Clearly this one doesn't have that because it's all manual. But looking at my other car, which does have the electronic adjustment, they're pretty much out in the open, and it looks like they would be relatively simple just to unscrew and replace if those motors weren't working. When you are installing this, there's no key on this end, but with the steering wheel straight, when you remove, so the wheels are straight ahead, what you should see is the universal joint should be perfectly straight up now, so the top of it should be flat. It should not be at an angle when you install that. I marked the side of these when I removed them and the side of the universal joint, but it's pretty obvious that is flat, and the top of that universal joint at the back is also flat.